Is Total War Warhammer worth playing in 2024? Yes, for sure. I came into this game with very limited knowledge of both Total War games and Warhammer. And while it's a game that I've always been curious about, it was actually chosen by viewers in the previous video as the game I should play next. And honestly, I enjoyed it far more than I thought I would. One quick note before I go further, at the end of the video, I'm going to try another attempt at letting the viewers decide the next game, so if you'd like to help select the next game, there will be some info at the end of the video, and the comments will decide it. Okay, so with that, Total War Warhammer was not exactly the game I thought it was. I actually expected a much more combat-focused game. Instead, I ended up finding a whole lot of 4X elements that I really didn't expect. I believe that's likely because the trailers and images often focus on the big battles with the large armies marching towards each other, units moving around a flank, cavalry units charging the infantry. I at least didn't realize the depth outside of the large battles. So that was a very pleasant surprise. I find the game's balance between the overworld map and the combat to be just about perfect. In fact, as somebody who plays Civilization, I actually found this to be far more to my liking. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy the Civilization games, but ultimately, I almost always end up working towards a military victory, and crushing your enemy in Total War Warhammer is so much more satisfying. So for anyone like me that wasn't aware of what this game was, I will go ahead and describe at a very high level what this game is. There are entire channels that are focused to the Total War games, so if you really want to go deep, you should definitely check out something else, but I'll at least give high level. You will pick a race and faction at the start. That race is going to help determine what units you're working with, and even the goals that you have for achieving victory. The difference in unit composition can actually be fairly massive, with some races getting large units, like trolls and ogres, others getting gyrocopters. Some races start with more armor, some are more heavy on offense, some are very focused on cavalry, some have no cavalry. I found this fairly off-putting at first, as my dwarf units were mowed down by cavalry units they didn't even have access to. I also didn't have access to spears, which would have helped fend off that cavalry. Not that I really would have understood that at the time. However, eventually I really started to appreciate these differences. My dwarves were slow, but they were well armored, and my early strategy really started to revolve around a heavily armored front line protecting my ranged. Eventually though, when I unlocked gyrocopters, things began to change, and I would flank melee units assaulting them from the sky, or I would have the gyrocopters chase down the ranged units that I couldn't catch with my dwarves because I lacked cavalry. It also made starting another class so much more interesting. When I chose the orcs, I had all this access to early cavalry that I didn't have when I was playing the dwarves. It made the playstyle entirely different, requiring a bit more micromanagement that was actually very rewarding. As mentioned, your goals change depending on race as well. Both the orcs and the dwarves had goals of annihilating one another, but the dwarves, for example, had a goal of settling grudges that they would develop along the way. If an enemy raided your lands, you may develop a grudge requiring you to defeat them or raid their lands. Completing these grudges would actually provide rewards, and you also needed to have all of your grudges completed in order to win. Other races would have different goals that had some similarities, like taking control of a certain area, but some key differences as well that made starting another campaign very, very appealing. I could actually have seen myself, because of the differences in units and the different victory conditions, wanting to play every single race. Unfortunately, I really don't want to pour that amount of hours into just one game at the moment, so I'm kind of saving it for later, but it is something I'll likely do in the future. Your time will be fairly well balanced between the overworld map, where you move units, construct buildings, and engage in diplomacy, and the combat, where you command your armies in epic battles. Those battles, except for a few quest battles, can be auto-resolved. The game will give you an estimate on how that battle will go, and most of the time it's fairly accurate. However, in later game I did find this to be less accurate. There were some battles I saved before and tried both ways. In one instance I attempted to auto-resolve while defending a city, and I was annihilated, which to be fair, it did predict. So then I reloaded and played out the same battle myself, and I won a decisive victory, losing less than 10% of my forces. I also had a battle against Chaos where it estimated we were fairly evenly matched, and when I attempted to fight that battle, I was crushed several times. I decided to reload and try to auto-resolve, and came away with a minor victory. Overall though, I really appreciate not having to fight every battle. There are some battles where you're going to be easily victorious, and it's really not worth your time to try to line up all your units and go fight that battle. So I really enjoyed the combat in the overworld, and honestly, I had to pull myself away from playing more. I saw someone mention in the comments of the video where the game was selected that I should play either of the other two options, because if I played Total War Warhammer, I would probably play nothing else for the next 3 months. This could have easily been true. I did find myself thinking, well, maybe just one more campaign. And that was after many nights of just one more turn. And I think I could have easily gone through every single race combination, as I kind of already mentioned. So there is a tremendous amount of replay value here, largely because of the number of differences between the races. It's also a very deep game, and a very satisfying game as you figure out how it works. However, that does bring me to my only real negative that I'll talk about, and it's probably the one that's most easily a deal breaker for some people. This game is so complicated for someone new to the series. There is so much going on, and while the game does try to tell you about some of it, there's a lot of things it doesn't fully explain, and some that you will likely not understand even when it is described to you, because the terminology being used will go over your head. Your armies can have different stances, which make a massive difference in how they operate. I didn't actually understand this properly until about 2/3 of the way through my first campaign. I didn't understand anything hero units could do until about halfway through the game. There's also a screen where every hero unit and commander where it will show their talents, which the game does actually show you right away. However, there's another tab on the screen where you can equip gear that I didn't find until I specifically looked it up, because it kept telling me I was getting all this gear and I had no idea how to equip it. That was about 3/4 of the way through the first campaign. Different screens will also give information on the enemy units and their strengths and weaknesses. It took me a long time to really understand the rock, paper, scissors of matchups that were needed in order to achieve cleaner victories. There was a Steam review that said something to the extent of, "I have no idea what I'm doing, but it seems fun." This is how I felt about 1/3 of the way through the game. And honestly, I was dreading trying to make a video about it, because I had no idea what was even happening. And while I'm still painfully aware that I'm just scratching the surface of understanding how this game works, I did start to understand enough that I felt like I was getting a pretty good grasp of what the game was. That's also when my enjoyment of it really picked up, when I started to really understand how everything worked. I'll also say that those discoveries, when I realized how something worked, when I realized how I could change my stances in order to get across areas of the map better and things like that, those were very satisfying. So with all that said, I 1000% recommend this to anyone that hasn't played the game or the series before that has any interest in strategy games. That said, you are going to need a certain level of patience. This game can be incredibly overwhelming, and it doesn't do a great job of teaching you many aspects about the game. Although, to be fair, if it did, the new player experience would be entirely miserable. There would be way too much to cover. My suggestion is to read everything you can in the game, and then look up the things you're confused about early. Don't wait. It probably isn't going to come to you as you play. I would just look it up. One other thing I will add, because I did see it mentioned in the Steam reviews as well, if you have both Total War Warhammer and Warhammer 2, let's say maybe you've got them both on Epic from the Epic giveaways, you could easily just play Total War Warhammer 2. There are some slight pros and cons to the UI in my opinion, but overall, you should be able to just unlock the campaign from the first game as long as you own the first game, and then you can play through it in Total War Warhammer 2. So that's where I'm going to leave it. It's an excellent game, and if it's not already on your backlog, I would absolutely add it. It's got a steep learning curve, but it's an excellent game. So the next Operation Backlog theme will be Indies of 2023. As I've said in the past, my backlog includes some recent games as well, so that's what we're doing for this round. First up is Dredge. I played a few minutes of Dredge towards the end of 2023 after purchasing it on Steam. I basically played enough to know that I wasn't going to return it, and then I ended up doing the same with Dave the Diver, and I never came back to Dredge. So would like to finish that up at some point. Second on the list is Wartales. This is a tactical turn-based RPG with a 91% very positive rating on Steam. It's been recommended to me by a few people and also by Steam itself repeatedly, and it's also on Game Pass at the moment. The third game is Sea of Stars. This game actually is what gave me the final push to finish Chrono Trigger. I've heard a few people call it a love letter to Chrono Trigger, which at the time I had never finished, Now that I have finished Chrono Trigger, I would like to go ahead and play Sea of Stars. Also, another game that's on Game Pass. The game with the most votes in the comments will decide it. If no one votes or there's a tie, I'll break the tie. I'll give it 2 days before I make a call. And with that, thanks for watching. The next video will be Mega Man 2, which I just finished a few days ago. There may be another video before we get to the 2023 indies, but we'll see how it all works out. If you enjoyed the video, maybe like or subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.